Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Remember when a movie about bad fish, a traumatized pilot,
somehow became one of the most influential comedies ever made? Well, that was Airplane. Paramount Pictures released it in 1980, and from the outside, it looked like every other high-stakes disaster movie of the era. You got a troubled pilot, panic passengers, looming catastrophe at 30,000 feet starring Robert Hayes, Julia Haggerty, Lloyd Bridges, Robert Stack, Peter Graves, and Leslie Nielsen, none of whom were actually hired to be funny. And that was the entire point. Now behind the deadpan one-liners, the background gags that you missed the first 3 times, and the rapid-fire punchlines that didn't stop long enough to let you breathe, Airplane had a production story almost as ridiculous as the movie itself. And today, we're going to count down 15 weird facts that you didn't know about Airplane. And stick around for number 1, because this movie almost never made it to theaters at all. And as you make yourself comfortable around the cabin, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. It helps YouTube know that you love the nostalgia deep dives of your favorite movies. All right, fasten your seatbelts. Let's prepare for takeoff. Number 15, the movie they accidentally recorded. Now, one of the funniest movies ever made exists because somebody forgot to turn off the VCR. But that's not a setup. That's the actual origin story. Jim Abrahams and Jerry and David Zucker, who also go by Zaz, had a habit that they called signing for fish, leaving a VCR running overnight to capture whatever strange late-night programming aired. And then they would mine it for parody material for their stage show Kentucky Fried Theater. One night, the tape grabbed a dead serious 1957 disaster film called 0 Hour. They couldn't stop laughing. The premise was completely straight-faced. A traumatized war veteran has to land a passenger plane after the crew is incapacitated by food poisoning. Every line was delivered with total sincerity. Every dramatic beat was begging for a punchline. And so the trio did something pretty genuinely insane. They used 0 Hour structure as a blueprint and started building jokes directly into the existing framework. Which is why watching both films back to back feels kind of surreal. The hero's name, Ted Stryker, S-T-R-Y-K-R, becomes, well, Ted Stryker, S-T-R-I-K-E-R. The food poisoning crisis gets transformed into Airplane's infamous bad fish scenario. Lines like sluggish like a wet sponge are heavily inspired by 0 Hour's dialogue. Sluggish like a wet sponge. Sluggish like a wet sponge. With the jokes turned all the way up. And then it became clear this wasn't a parody anymore. This was a remake. And, in Hollywood, that's the kind of sentence that can end with lawyers. So, the trio tracked down the owners of 0 Hour, and they bought the official remake rights outright for $2,500. That payment became a legal force field. Characters, staging, dialogue, all of it suddenly theirs to use freely. Airplane went on to gross over $171 million worldwide and redefine movie comedy entirely. That $2,500 may be the best bargain in Hollywood history. Number 14, the casting gamble that made Airplane work. Now, when the Airplane script landed at Paramount, studio executives had a very clear vision for Ted Stryker. You get a big comedy name, CHVY Chase, Bill Murray, some of the audiences already knew was funny. But Zaz said absolutely not. The search for Stryker produced some genuinely surprising auditions. Bruce Jenner reportedly read for the role, but the directors wanted someone with more of a slightly shell-shocked, awkward quality that didn't quite fit the heroic pilot angle that the studio had in mind. David Letterman screen tested for the part. Zaz liked him enough to want a second audition, but Letterman decided that the role wasn't for him. Even the great Barry Manilow was actually pushed by the studio, but Zaz, they wanted no part of him. According to production accounts, a sympathetic Paramount exec ran interference, calling Manilow directly and emphasizing just how inexperienced the directing team was, essentially talking him out of the role on Zaz's behalf. Those finalos, I tell you. And then they found Robert Hayes. Earnest, a little nervous, capable of delivering complete nonsense with total conviction. And for the cherry on top, he actually was a licensed pilot. That role was his. I flew single-engine fighters in the Air Force, but this plane has 4 engines. It's an entirely different kind of flying. Now, the search for Elaine had its own complications. Sigourney Weaver, fresh off Alien, reportedly considered the role, but eventually passed, possibly put off by some of the script's more crude moments. Shelley Long also circled the part before Julia Haggerty walked in and immediately won the room. One audition, zero hesitation, role locked. Number 13. The Maestro of Mischief. Now Leslie Nielsen spent 30 years being taken seriously. Then he discovered the fart machine, and he never looked back. The device was a small handheld noisemaker. The exact origin is a little murky, though, with accounts ranging from an Oklahoma craftsman to a favor from the Paramount prop department. What's not in dispute is what he did with it. On the set of Airplane, Nielsen would deploy it mid-con conversation and continue speaking like absolutely nothing had happened, leaving cast and crew scrambling not to break. Robert Hayes said Nielsen played that thing like a maestro, and Nielsen never wanted to keep a good thing to himself. Eventually started selling them to the crew for $7 apiece. It got so out of hand that the assistant director eventually banned them from the set entirely. Now, Nielsen obviously ignored this in a way that only a man with a fart machine in his pocket could by taking the act everywhere. Press junkets, interviews, dinner parties, elevators. He reportedly even deployed it at the White House, on a flight in first class, and virtually on every talk show he ever appeared on. It was always the same move. Straight face, zero acknowledgement, total commitment. Although, I will do almost anything I can for a laugh. The joke became inseparable from his legacy right up to the very end. Nielsen's tombstone reads simply, "Let her rip." He spent the next 30 years making sure nobody could take him seriously, and he left specific instructions to make sure that it stayed that way. Number 12. The heckle that came straight from real life. Now, the moment a 10-year-old passenger casually roasts Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the cockpit might be the most unexpected trash talk in movie history. But it wasn't random. By 1979, Kareem was already one of the greatest basketball players alive. Multiple MVP awards, a dominant center for the Lakers. But critics sometimes accused him of coasting a little bit during the regular season and not giving full effort on defense. So, when Joey leans forward and delivers the "My dad says you don't work hard enough on defense and that you don't really try except during the playoffs, I think you're the greatest, but my dad says you don't work hard enough on defense," the joke lands really hard because it echoes exactly the kind of criticism that Kareem occasionally heard from sports media. But Kareem's comeback, tell your old man to drag Walton and Lanier up and down the court for 48 minutes. That wasn't random either. The great Bill Walton and Bob Lanier were two of the most physically punishing centers in the league. This scene gave Kareem something that he rarely got publicly, the last word. According to some retrospective accounts, the role was actually intended for one of my favorite athletes of all time, Pete Rose. But filming conflicted with the 1979 MLB season, leaving the co-pilot seat open for the 7'2" Lakers center, instead of Charlie Hustle. And Kareem's salary negotiation deserves its own entry in Hollywood history. Zaz offered him $30,000, and then his agent came back asking for $35,000. And the reason was very specific. That was the exact price of an oriental rug that Kareem wanted to buy. An art piece, not one to walk on. Zaz assumed it was like a creative bargaining tactic, but they agreed, half amused. And then a few weeks later, an article in Time magazine ran a photo of Kareem standing in front of the rug he'd already purchased with their money. He got the role, he got the rug, and he got the last word on defense. Not a bad day's work for a co-pilot. Number 11. The Joke a Minute Blueprint. Film historians often estimate that Airplane crammed somewhere around 260 jokes into its 88-minute runtime. That's roughly 3 per minute, which means that Zaz had a precise engineering mindset. They weren't satisfied with funny. They wanted relentless. Their philosophy was simple. Keep the audience laughing so relentlessly that nobody has time to question how completely insane the story is. And the solution was laying. While one joke lands in the foreground, something ridiculous is already happening behind the actors. Background signs, visual gags. Passengers doing things that nobody on screen acknowledges. You miss one punchline, and another is already on the way. The film was deliberately designed to reward repeat viewings, with new details revealing themselves every time. The film practically demanded a second viewing, and then a third, because there was always something that you missed. And some of the cleverest jokes weren't even visible. For example, throughout the entire film, the plane on screen looks like a modern jetliner, at least for back then. But you see us now. You should be able to see the field now. The sound that you hear, that's not a jet engine at all. It's a rhythmic chug of a propeller aircraft. And that sound was lifted directly from 0 Hour. A hidden callback to the film's origin story baked into every single aerial shot. Now, your eyes see a modern jet, and your ears, they're here in the 1950s. It's the kind of detail that most viewers never consciously register. Our brains automatically fill an airplane sounds when we see a plane on screen. But aviation buffs, they eventually caught it. Film historians noted it. And once you hear it, you absolutely cannot unhear it. The perfect airplane joke hidden in plain sight, quietly humming underneath the entire movie. Number 10. The Broadway legend in a combat helmet. So the soldier in the hospital bed who suddenly launches into a full Broadway number. That's not an impersonator. That is the real thing. The setup is pure zazz. Ted Stryker walks through a military ward, and a doctor leans over to explain the patient in the corner. Severe shell shock. He thinks he's Ethel Merman. Severe shell shock. He thinks he's Ethel Merman. And then Ethel Merman sits up in bed and proves him right. The real Ethel Merman, one of the most powerful voices in Broadway history. The woman that critics said could fill a theater before amplification was standard immediately belts out everything's coming up roses from Gypsy. And the bit ends the only way that it could, orderly rushing in and sedating her mid-song. The joke has two layers working at once. First, a male soldier convinced that he's a Broadway legend. And then the camera pulling back as the punchline arrives. He actually is. The gag only works because the real Merman agreed to play it completely straight, which given her reputation for commitment was never really in question. It is worth noting, though, that this was Merman's final film role. She died in 1984, and Airplane was her last on-screen appearance. A Broadway legend in a military hospital ward, delivering a show-stopping performance in uniform, getting knocked unconscious mid-note. I mean, in a film built on absurdity, this feels perfectly on key. Number 9. Play it like it's not a comedy. The most important rule on the set of Airplane was also the strangest one. Nobody was allowed to act like they were in a comedy. Zucker Abrahams and Zucker believed that the jokes would self-destruct the moment an actor winked at the audience. So, they gave every cast member one instruction. Play every scene like you're in a deadly serious thriller. And the cast understood the assignment eventually. Robert Stack initially played the role flat and kind of monotone, completely missing the tone that Zaz needed. You can't come straight in. You got enough fuel left for 2 hours of music flying. Their solution was a little unusual. They showed him a tape of comedian John Byner doing an impression of Robert Stack. And what they wanted was Stack doing Byner doing Stack. 3 layers of deadpan seriousness all pointed in the same direction. Stack. He understood it immediately. Lloyd Bridges watched his character unravel from cigarettes to alcohol to sniffing glue without breaking once. Peter Graves called the script the most disgusting piece of trash he'd ever read and nearly walked. But Zaz assured him that his more uncomfortable lines would be explained later in a scene that he wasn't in. There was no such scene, though. They never told him that. And for the role of Dr. Rumack, the part that Leslie Nielsen made legendary, Ziggs had first approached Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Jack Webb, all great actors and all of whom passed. Vincent Price would later call turning it down his greatest career regret. The secret of Airplane was always simple. The actors believed every word they were saying, and that's exactly what made it so hilarious. Number 8. The composer who played it deadpan. The philosophy of playing it straight didn't just stop at the actors. For the score, Zaz hired Elmer Bernstein, the man behind the legendary soundtracks for The Magnificent Seven and To Kill a Mockingbird, and gave him a very specific brief. Not an epic score like his past work, but A-B movie-level score. Overdone corny, the musical equivalent of a disaster film that takes itself just a little too seriously. Now, Bernstein had actually done this before. 2 years earlier, director John Landis had asked him to do that for Animal House in the same way. He played the comedy completely straight, as if the Delta frat were actual heroes. It worked so well that it relaunched Bernstein's career into comedy films entirely. By the time Airplane came along, he'd already perfected that method. So, he approached Airplane the same way. Lush strings, dramatic bass, ominous chords pulled straight from the disaster film playbook. Every tense musical cue designed to make the audience feel real danger right up until the punchline arrived and pulled the rug out entirely. Now, think about that for a second. The music's telling you that this is serious, and the screen is showing you a rubber autopilot. And somehow both things are true at the same time. That's kind of the unsung genius of Airplane. The joke isn't just what you see, it's what you hear. And Bernstein never once let you in on it. Hey, quick pause. If the words, "surely you can't be serious," just ran through your head completely unprompted, welcome. You're among friends. Hey, drop your favorite gag in the comments. The inflatable autopilot, the Kareem cockpit reveal, "Don't call me Shirley." Whatever line still lives rent-free in your head 45 years later, we want to know. And if you're enjoying this countdown, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. But we're not done yet. The best facts are still on the runway. P4. Number 7. The June Cleaver Jive Translator. After Leave to Beaver ended in 1963, Barbara Billingsley found herself kind of typecast in a way that's nearly impossible to escape. The image had locked in completely. Sweet, proper, perfect pearls, perfect grammar. And once that image cemented, offers slowed dramatically. She went 17 years with barely a credit to her name. But then Airplane came along with one of the more unusual casting ideas in comedy history. Inspired by the rhythms and vernacular of films like the 1971 hit Shaft, Zaz conceived a scene where two passengers speak in dense jive slang and someone translates it for the rest of the cabin. The first draft didn't work. Actors Al White and Norman Alexander Gibbs read it and delivered the same verdict. The slang just sounded fake. Not funny fake, just wrong. So, Zaz did something that was kind of rare for directors. They handed the scene over entirely, and White and Gibbs researched African American vernacular and rebuilt the dialogue from scratch, keeping it exaggerated but grounded enough to feel real. But now, they needed a translator, and the joke only worked with the most buttoned-up, wholesome person on the planet. They went to Harriet Nelson first, equally wholesome, equally perfect. But she passed, which left the door open for Billingsley. Billingsley read the script, and her dialogue was simply listed as Talks Jive. She called the whole thing the craziest script I've ever read, and she signed on immediately. White and Gibbs took her to lunch and coached her personally on rhythm and delivery. The result was comedy perfection. Watching America's most proper TV mom calmly translate Just Hang Loose Blood for the bewildered stewardess absolutely destroyed test audiences. Just hang loose blood. She going to catch up and rebound out of med. The cameo revived everything. After years of limited roles, she was back on talk shows, fielding fan mail, and taking on new projects. Billingsley said it herself. It started my whole career again. It turns out that all it took to break the June Cleaver curse was one flight and a crash course in jive. Number 6, the joke that needed the wrong voices. Now, the Airplane announcer gag in Airplane starts quietly. Two calm voices over a PA system repeating the same familiar warning. The white zone is for loading and unloading only. The white zone is for immediate loading and unloading of passengers only. Now, at first, it sounds exactly like every airport announcement you've ever tuned out before the gate number even registered. But then something strange happens. The announcers start arguing. The polite, sterile tone never changes, but the conversation slowly turns into a full-blown personal dispute. Deliver with the same calm professionalism normally reserved for baggage claim updates. There's no yelling, no punchlines, just two voices methodically unraveling over a public address system, while everything around them falls apart. And just when you think it can't escalate any further, it takes a hard left turn into deeply personal domestic territory that has absolutely nothing to do with airport zoning. And the genius casting detail. Well, Zaz auditioned professional voice actors and couldn't find anyone who sounded authentic enough. So they tracked down and hired an actual real-life married couple who had recorded the genuine PA announcement tapes being used at LAX at the time. The couple playing a bickering married couple over the airport intercom were in real life a married couple. Now, the humor isn't in what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. That flat, emotionally neutral delivery is so perfectly calibrated to the sound of an airport that the contrast between the tone and the content does all the heavy lifting. It's almost the kind of gag that gets funnier every time that you fly somewhere and a gate announcement comes on. You're never going to hear the white zone is for loading and unloading only the same way again. You're welcome. Number 5. The To Prove You're Funny deadline. Now, when the airplane script reached Paramount, the studio liked what they read, and what made them nervous was who wanted to direct it. Zaz had already written the Kentucky Fried Movie, but John Landis had directed it. And this time, the trio wanted the job themselves, despite never having directed a feature film before. They got an unlikely assist from Chaos Elsewhere on the lot. Paramount was so consumed managing the runaway budget of Star Trek the Motion Picture that a $3.5 million comedy about bad fish barely registered on the radar. Still, the deal did come with a catch. Paramount insisted on placing veteran producer Howard W. Koch as an executive overseer with a formal clause that Zaz could be fired after 2 weeks if the footage wasn't landing. Zaz said sure. They were learning to run a major film set in real time, managing actors, crews, union rules, and a script packed with rapid-fire jokes that only worked if the delivery was completely straight. Then the studio started seeing the footage. Dead serious actors selling ridiculous lines, razor-sharp pacing, a comedic style unlike anything else in theaters at the time. Nobody said a word about replacing anybody. 3-time first directors from Wisconsin walked into that window with everything to prove. I think after years of telling people this is going to be a hit, then when it was a hit, all they needed was a little bit of runway to take off. Number 4, the Directors Guild didn't want 3 directors. Now, Paramount wasn't the only obstacle that Zaz had to navigate. The Directors Guild of America was another problem entirely. Now in Hollywood, directing credits are tightly controlled by the DGA, and the Guild's preference has always been pretty straightforward. You get one film, one director. So that created a problem for Zaz. They wrote together. They built jokes together. They approached every creative decision as a single unit. The idea of splitting them up was like trying to run a 3-legged race, but with only 2 legs, if that makes sense. So the trio formally submitted a request for a shared pseudonym, Abrahams and Zuckers, which would be one imaginary human made of 3 real ones. But the Guild said no. Now for a while, the plan was to list just Jerry Zucker alone as director. Hi, I'm Jerry Zucker, and I was one of the guys that made Airplane, with David and Jim quietly running things behind closed doors. Then the Guild's executive board granted a formal waiver, and the whole workaround became unnecessary. When Airplane hit theaters, the directing line read exactly the way that the team always worked. Directed by Abrahams, Zucker, and Zucker. It was a rare approval for a directing arrangement that the industry wasn't exactly comfortable with, and it quietly helped normalize the idea of collaborative directing teams. And think about it, the Coens, the Ferries, Wowskis, they all followed with their own partnerships in the years ahead. 3 guys who refused to take turns, and they changed how Hollywood counts to 1. Number 3, the bean dip explosion that you didn't notice. Now, the man overseeing one of the messiest gags in Airplane had just a year earlier been running the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Let that sink in. Howard W. Koch, executive producer and former Academy president from 1977 to 1979, was at the helm when the effects team built an air-powered mortar loaded with real bean dip for the scene. The reasoning: it had exactly the right kind of thick, chunky consistency to blast convincingly across the room and stick to everything it touched. According to behind-the-scenes accounts from the DVD commentary, the first take didn't go as planned. Instead of hitting the fan, the mortar fired directly into Steven Stucker, the gloriously unhinged control tower messenger. It a big, pretty white plane with red stripes and curtains in the window and wheels, and it looks like a big Tylenol, which caught him completely off guard and covered him in bean dip. His reaction, by all accounts, was not acting. They cleaned up the set. They cleaned up the actor and then reset. The subsequent take worked exactly as intended. The man who'd spent 2 years presiding over Hollywood's most prestigious organization personally designed the gag where something unpleasant hits a spinning fan, and it took out one of his own cast members in rehearsal. Oscar history. It's never quite been the same. Number 2. The 35-day comedy sprint. The entire production of Airplane wrapped in 35 days. Principal photography kicked off on June 20th of 1979, mostly on sound stages at Culver City Studios. Zaz ran the set with intense focus and precision, finishing on schedule and inside a $3.5 million budget. But the problem wasn't the shoot. It was what came out of it. The rough cut ran about 115 minutes, almost half an hour longer than what audiences eventually saw. You had extra subplots, experimental gags that just kind of sat there. One fully filmed scene featuring Jose Feliciano as a blind air Poland pilot. And preview audiences. Well, they greeted it with near total silence. But for a comedy movie that was built entirely on rapid-fire punchlines, you can't have dead air. That's not an option. So, Zaz did something that no Hollywood studio would sanction today. They took the film on a tour of college campuses and movie theaters and handed the editing decisions to the audience. Every screening was a live lab. They'd watch the crowd, not the screen. Big laugh, that joke stays. Quiet room gone. No committee, no focus group reports, no executive notes, just real people in real seats telling them in real time what was funny and what wasn't. 27 minutes hit the cutting room floor. And what survived was a lean, relentless 88-minute comedy where the next joke was already landing before you'd finished laughing at the last one. That rhythm didn't happen in an editing suite. It happened in college auditoriums and movie houses across America, engineered by audiences who didn't even know that they were cutting a movie. 35 days to shoot it. A road trip to fix it. One of the most perfectly paced comedies ever made. Number 1. When Hollywood tried to ground Airplane. By 1980, Universal Pictures had spent the better part of the decade building a disaster movie empire. Airport 1975, Airport 77, The Concorde, Airport 79. For films, a franchise, a brand. So, when Paramount announced a comedy movie called Airplane, a direct parody of everything Universal had spent years building, things got pretty complicated and fast. During pre-production, Universal filed a formal complaint with the MPAA, arguing the title and concept were just too close to their airport franchise. The arbitration board ruled in Universal's favor, meaning internationally the movie couldn't be called Airplane at all. So, audiences in the UK, Australia, and several other markets saw it as Flying High. So, if you've ever stumbled across a vintage overseas poster and you wondered why the word airplane was nowhere on it, well, now you know. The legal pressure extended to casting too. Zaz wanted Helen Reddy, the singing nun from Airport 1975, to reprise the same role as a direct parody, but Universal said absolutely not. The part went to Maureen McGovern instead, which turned out to be an even sharper joke. McGovern had sung the theme songs to the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno. They replaced one disaster movie nun with a woman who'd been singing over disaster movies for the better part of a decade. Now, when Airplane expanded wide on January 2nd of 1980, it became an immediate massive hit. And Universal, they quietly dropped the fight. Suing the most successful comedy of the year would have made them look exactly like the kind of humorless villain that the movie was already lampooning. They delivered a comedy that was so precise, so relentless, and just so completely absurd that even Hollywood's lawyers, as powerful as they can be, still couldn't keep it grounded. Airplane set a new standard for parody that endures to this day, 45 years later, and it's still the same flight everyone is trying to catch. And there you have it, 15 weird facts about the hit movie Airplane. A parody of disaster movies, starring dramatic actors, delivering completely ridiculous dialogue with total sincerity. But audiences got it immediately. Which fact surprised you the most? Well, be sure to drop it in the comments. And before we deplane, ring that bell. And Until next time, I am serious. I am serious. Don't call me Shirley. This is Remember When.